In 2021, a manga artist had their manga practically copied by another mangaka, who then proceeded to find success while the original lost their job with the same company. Not long after, the first one helped pay their bills by writing an NTR doujin on commission of their female lead. How did we get here? In 2019, Arrow artist Panya Kawa started writing a silly romantic comedy series called Dojima-kun Won't Be Disturbed. It's about a seemingly unflappable high schooler and a blonde classmate who sits next to him and tries to get his demeanor to falter via flirting. In 2020, manga publisher Kodansha serialized this webcomic on one of their web platforms. In 2021, Kodansha's weekly shonen magazine debuted a silly romantic comedy series called Kuroiwa Medaka is Immune to My Charms. It's about a seemingly unflappable high schooler and a blonde classmate who sits next to him and tries to get his demeanor to falter via flirting. Within the calendar year, Dojima-kun Won't Be Disturbed gets axed after only about 30 chapters. Legal disclaimer: I do not know what goes on behind closed doors at Kodansha. Manga is a creative medium, and like all creative mediums, its works are influenced by what came before it. And that might serve as a potential explanation for not only why half of Kuroiwa Medaka's premise seems almost identical to Dojima-kun, but also why the other half of its premise seems identical to something from Psyche K. Dojima-kun is a delightful little treat. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's some literary masterpiece, but it's a fun time. It's memorable, and it's enough of a page-turner that it's easy to just read the whole thing by accident in an afternoon and then bemoan that it ended so early. That's what happened to me. Reading Kuroiwa Medaka is more akin to pulling teeth and is at times physically painful. Now, I have no reason to believe that Kuroiwa Medaka is any kind of intentional copy of an existing work, and even if it was, the core premise of it is abandoned so early on in favor of more generic, unoriginal material that it's barely worth litigating. But from Kodansha's point of view, what happened did make sound business sense. There's a webcomic which isn't exactly breaking the box office, but then along comes what is more or less just a more marketable version of it with more fan service, more explicit wish fulfillment, and higher fidelity art. If I were a soulless corporation, I, too, would abandon the first one in this situation out of fear that they will be compared. I can't confirm that this is what Kodansha's thought process was, or if this was even a consideration, but at the very least, I think it's fair to say that this whole situation constitutes at least a dick move. And Kuroiwa Medaka is marketable. Just take it from prominent Japanese hip-hop artist Hanya, who, right off the tail of his character arc where he learned to stop hating LGBT people, gave a glowing endorsement of the anime adaptation in an interview. He talks about how all of the different scenarios tickle his masculine heart and made him feel like he wanted to be treated the same way. However, its manga circulation has been waning. It was popular early on, but has only hemorrhaged sales as time marched along, and I think I know why. To read Kuroiwa Medaka is to gaze into an abyss long forgotten. It feels like it was something written in the mid-2000s in all of the worst ways. Back then, it was really common to have what were at the time referred to as harem manga. That is a term that has persisted, but its meaning has been diluted. Nowadays, harem just refers to any story where there are more than two love interests for the protagonist, but in the past, it had a more specific financial connotation. The harem manga of old, like Nisekoi and To Love Ru, weren't so much romantic comedies as they were Skinner boxes. The structure of the story was less focused on any sort of narrative fundamentals and was instead focused on keeping readers hooked. The goal was specifically to get them to continue wanting to check in on developments week to week as new issues of the magazine were released. The result of this is narrative decay. However strong of an idea a story has for one of its female characters, no matter how compelling they are in a vacuum, that effort is inevitably wasted, because everything that builds up these female characters, that builds up their relationship with the protagonist or their own likability, are not narrative setup for the sake of a future payoff. They are promises for the sake of a promise existing, so that you can look forward to a future hypothetical payoff solely to get people to continue reading. If any of it actually resolves, the formula breaks and the whirlpool stops sucking you in. Over the course of the past decade or so, this has shifted. Because of the internet and the surprising prominence of mid-2010s romance webcomics such as Tomo is a Girl or Tsurezuri Children, the content of shonen romcoms began to develop into its modern form. Free from executive influence and the medium of serialized magazines, these manga were allowed to be more traditional love stories, even when aimed at a male demographic that's usually believed to only want the harem slog. We can speculate all day about the exact psychology and sociology around what happened next, but overall, people became privy to the tricks of harem stories and grew disdainful towards them. A story being a harem slop started becoming a weakness to a lot of readers rather than a strength. That's not to say there isn't a market for it. Aspects of harem manga still have appeal to people, particularly the wish fulfillment element of a single male character having an absurd number of romantic interests. There will always be people shooting for this kind of story, but they have gone from the core demographic of shonen magazines to a prominent niche. The leading manga publisher, Shueisha, owner of Shonen Jump, gets this. They have always been on top of industry trends, and historically have been the one to set them. While Shonen Jump does have two harem manga in it in the form of Nue's Exorcist and arguably Himiten, the vast majority of rom-com content they publish is free from the trappings of the genre, save for some small vestiges. Thanks to the wild success of Dandadan and Spy Family, the strategy they now favor is to have some sort of established genre they know already sells and then have romance be a central part of it, with a singular core ship that does not have any serious love rivals outside of, running gags. For sports manga, you have Blue Box, and for battle shonen, you have things like Witch Watch, Shinobi Undercover, and Sirens Won't Sing for You. Even when you think of big-ticket modern romance stories aimed at shonen audiences, your mind goes to non-harem stories such as Sunday Shonen's Akira Failing in Love. Kuroiwa Medaka, however, has nothing going for it other than that it is a harem manga. Throwing a bunch of cute girls at the bland male lead and having them obsessively pine over him is the only trick the story has in its over 180 chapter run after it abandons its initial premise. And the result is that the story is not only weak, but devoid of anything that most readers aren't already sick of. Go to Himiten and you can get a well-done core ship. Go to Nue's Exorcist and you get action. If you don't believe me, you can just ask the fans. Note.com user Pantaloons, upon hearing about the announcement, gave their thoughts as a genuine enjoyer of the manga. They say that while they enjoy the characters and the art, the story is garbage. Even the marketing cannot run from the story's biggest problems. Now, I am not deft when it comes to the Japanese internet landscape, but from what I can tell, KininaruVod.com has the appearance of a grassroots blog website. Suspiciously, though, every post on it is about this anime, appears to be AI generated, and worst of all, is listed as paid promotion. It is one of several more or less identical websites. There's just a whole ecosystem of AstroTurf, AI slop, guerrilla marketing for this anime, and even these disingenuous pieces of puff journalism cannot avoid discussing all the problems that people have with the anime and the manga, including how the premise is kind of toxic and creepy, and how people are sick of love triangles and harem nonsense. People hate this stuff. I find myself caught in a bind. On one hand, Kuroiwa Medaka represents some of the worst that the manga industry has to offer. It is boring, trite, kish, aggravating, toxic nonsense, a Skinner box with no ambitions or aspirations besides continuing to exist, born less from genuine passion and more from cutthroat business pragmatics. It is poorly written in ways that represent both the poisonous incentives of the for-profit businesses that publish these manga, as well as the worst impulses of the reader. But at the same time, it's easy to fall into a trap here. We can talk all day about how the story is misogynistic and use wish fulfillment as if it's this dirty term, but In doing so, we'd be making the same mistake as the people who made fun of teenage girls for reading Twilight. Wish fulfillment is not an inherently bad thing, and people are not bad people for being products of their environment whose image of romantic perfection is governed by toxic ideas they did not themselves create. Nor is it right to assume that them having a strong emotional connection to those toxic ideas means that they stand by them, act on them, or identify with them, and it also doesn't mean that those ideas cannot have any genuine value. But in spite of all of that lenience, I can give the story's existence and, to the process of being a fan of it, its content is holistically offensive on a critical level, and so, without further ado, let's talk about why it is just so terribly written. First off, the premise. I talked about the premise in a previous video, but it won't hurt to go over. Mona Kawaii is the cutest girl in her school, and there is nary a boy her age who hasn't fallen for her. However, there is one boy who always gives her the cold shoulder. Kuroiwa Medaka. You could say that he is impervious to her charms. Kyuk. She tries putting the charms on him out of pride, but he always seems to grimace at her. The reason for this is, unbeknownst to her, that he is a monk who has sworn off romance, and whenever he feels attracted to her or some other girl, he meditates to cleanse himself of sinful desires, during which he grimaces. As I stated in a previous video, this fails because it's hinging on the shallowest possible interpretation of its own subject matter. The story asks us to view attraction in the least nuanced way possible, where people can just have more objective attractiveness than others. So at once it is setting this up as a core theme, and at the same time, the premise falls apart if you ever explore that theme, and to the story's credit, it doesn't explore that theme. There's also this element of aimlessness to it. Dojima-kun has a very deliberate structure baked into its premise. Every chapter, the female lead has a new scheme to try and tease Dojima, and then it fails in increasingly spectacular ways as she gets flustered and improvises. And, as part of this, you have the element of Dojima being very difficult to read. It is up to the audience to infer what he is thinking at any given time, which makes the process of reading this manga very active. Kuroiwa has none of that. Not only is there nothing interesting or evocative about how the dynamic plays out, but it also gets stretched to hell because there is no consistent chapter-to-chapter structure. Entire schemes get spread out to several chapters, and many chapters have no connection to the premise because the story just isn't that focused and doesn't have a clear idea of what it wants to be or what it has to offer. As I stated earlier, there's chemistry between the main couple of Dojima. They're friends who enjoy each other's company, and they bring out a lot of good things in each other. None of it needs to be spelled out, it's all just part of their dynamic. But Kuroiwa doesn't have the luxury of its dynamics being entertaining and human, because it's the worst kind of harem rom-com. The male lead, Kuroiwa Medaka, doesn't have anything that particularly spectacular about him that makes him popular with the girls besides, being the main character. There's some weak attempts at justifying things where he'll, do something nice for one of them that makes them fall in love, but one of his 3 core love interests, deadass just fell in love at first sight, and that's all you get with her. Like many lazy rom-coms, someone at one point goes on a speech about how you can't choose who you fall in love with and how it's never this rational thing. People just fall in love 'cause they do. But this isn't a thematic thrust of the story, it's a justification. We can talk all day about the validity of this statement as it applies to real life. You can make the argument that love is irrational to some extent. A lot of people think it's wholly irrational, but what isn't up for debate is that this is not only the laziest writing decision available to the author, but it's also the one that leaves him with the least to work with. When 2 characters like each other for a reason, that is something you can narratively take advantage of. In Blue Box, the male lead inspires the female lead to try harder at basketball, and she inspires him to, try harder at badminton. That's a thing that spurs on their feelings, and so when one of them sees the other doing well at their sport, also trying hard, it affects them, which gets the audience emotionally engaged. When Tomo and Jun are both really enjoying the same activities, it's cute, and it makes you want to see them succeed. If you don't have anything, then the only things you can lean on are cliched tropes that are not only weak because everyone has already seen them done a million times, but also because they are not specific to your protagonists. Watching two people blush around each other as they take selfies in a photo booth doesn't hit very hard when you didn't already have a reason to care about their feelings for each other. Let's talk about that wish fulfillment angle. As I said earlier, wish fulfillment shouldn't be a dirty term. It's actually pretty normal for our fiction to include idealizations of things found in the real world. It's not bad that the characters in romantic comedies are meant to be seen by the audience as eligible and attractive individuals, or for the situations they find themselves in to be vicariously thrilling. There is something to be said, however, about what wishes are being fulfilled and if they are wishes worth having. The principal wish fulfillment of the start of the story is the fantasy of having a girl flirt with you who is so attractive it gets your male friends to be jealous, which is pretty sad. And as the story abandons its initial loose premise and then just turns into a story about these three girls trying and failing to ask out the least intimidating boy in the world, the story is just about what it would be like if three girls had very little concern for your religious beliefs and considered you a fortress to be conquered. Like, to be clear, Kuroiwa wants to remain chaste for spiritual reasons. He's a monk. That's something that's really important to him. However much it was imposed on him by his family, it is still a key aspect of his life that he has strong emotions about. The problem is that this detail only exists so that the initial premise, which was abandoned by the way, could make sense. It's all for a bad joke that already ended, and now it's just leaving a bad taste in my mouth when I have to see this story just show no interest in what the self-insert actually cares about or feels. You feel bad for the guy, and that's not good when the goal is to be wish-fulfilling. Even those AI slop blogs acknowledge that a lot of people find what the female lead is doing to be creepy and kind of off-putting. It's also pretty tasteless. Like, it's very important to this manga that the girls are all really qualified to be attractive love interests, to the point that it starts feeling insecure about it. Like, you need to understand that other people have crushes on these girls. And the fan service can just get too in-your-face and non-diegetic. I fully empathize with why a hormonal 14-year-old boy would find a lot of emotional catharsis in seeing these three cute girls fawn over the same guy, but I feel like the readers of Weekly Shonen magazine deserve something with a little more pathos than a ham-fisted beauty pageant that they don't really even try to justify in-universe. The story just becomes about these three girls and their journey to woo the same guy. Like, they get together and discuss the metagame of wooing Kuroiwa Medaka. It's practically a social activity for them to just brag about the strategies they're using, which could be a funny premise if it was self-aware, but it's just a real case of men writing women. More than anything, they are like this because their only role is to marinate in a stale status quo. There is nothing else happening in the narrative of the story for the most part, and so there's nothing else for them to talk about. And this just shines an enormous light on how absolutely depressing their idea of flirting is. Don't get me wrong, they do flirt effectively in the moment-to-moment. They have riz, but all of them are so unable to just tell the guy how they feel. It's a level of lacking self-confidence that actually gets really condescending. It's done as a plot contrivance because the moment one of them confesses to him that they like him, the story basically ends, at least the status quo does. But it's all taken so earnestly, despite the incredibly inorganic nature of their insecurities. Two girls will have a discussion about how neither of them can work up the courage to ask this guy out, only for one of them to immediately aura farm while saying something deep-sounding about the nature of love, but no, girl, I think this one's on you. It's just so much of the same uninteresting thing. The premise got old by, like, chapter 8 or something, and the new status quo of girls pining for this bland guy got old by chapter 40 at the latest. And this thing has over 180 chapters with very little substantial progress or change in its status quo. It's just so much of nothing. A girl convinces this guy to go on a date. Maybe she accidentally confesses only to take it back by pretending she said something else. Repeat ad infinitum. To be fair, there are moments where it's bearable. Like Skeleton Knight in Another World, this manga has an ultimately competent author with a solid grasp of fundamentals who is dealing with just rancid subject matter, held back by the fact that the selling point of his story renders him incapable of straying away from his worst ideas. Everything involving these four characters is unreadable garbage, but when it focuses on the side characters, it's fine. Just a perfectly serviceable rom-com. There's a number of fun characters who are themselves invested in Kuroiwa's love life, like this girl Asahi, or the female lead's younger brother, and their desire to see this play out before them is so much more relatable and compelling than the very love drama they're salivating over. There's also these two characters who are developing a crush on each other, and it's given room to breathe, and so it's just this cute little thing because it doesn't have to bear the weight of the story's wish fulfillment quota. Probably the most interesting new addition to the cast is this girl who's basically just a younger copy of the female lead. She intends to dethrone Mona as the queen bee, but Mona's younger brother is here to tell her that he sees through her, and that she's gonna have to try harder if she wants to dethrone his sister. And in doing so, the story creates this copy of the original dynamic that's endlessly more interesting. The story centers around competition, but there's nothing worth competing over to relate to. And while we are meant to empathize with these girls on their quest to get in amongst pants, that is not something that the target demographic can relate to. Like, most of the pathos exists with the girls who are being objectified, the girls whose psyches are being written unrealistically for the sake of fantasy, rather than the character that the readers are meant to project themselves onto and who is allowed to have relatable emotions. All of the most evocative artistic moments have to do with this sense of competition. Characters are constantly throwing out these aura-farming one-liners or coming up with some variety of strategy, and it's just really clear that this author would be much more at home writing about, like, wizard battles or basketball. Maybe he could be trusted to handle a romantic subplot, but this just is not the genre he should be writing in, and I hope one day this gets axed so that he can use his talents on something that doesn't make me cringe out of my skin. I think he has it in him. As always, I want to thank my patrons, especially my Tier 2 patrons, Carolyn, Vig, and Love Your Content. And as always, I'd like to ask you to like and comment. It does wonders for the algorithm like you couldn't believe, and also, make sure to subscribe to my Patreon if you want to get these videos early, alongside sneak peeks at larger projects I'm working on. Also, read Dojima-kun Won't Be Disturbed. It's genuinely quite good.